The invasion began under the cold glow of distant stars as the Dominion fleet emerged from the void of hyperspace, their ships forming an ominous web of destruction around Earth. Dozens of capital ships, each the size of a human city, cast long shadows against the planet's surface. Their hulls, forged from dark composite alloys, reflected nothing, appearing as shifting voids against the backdrop of the cosmos. Smaller warships, sleek and bristling with weapons, drifted into formation, awaiting the command that would mark the end of human civilization. High Commander Vorik stood at the central observation deck of the Dominion flagship, Kavarn's Wrath, his segmented armor gleaming under the sterile white lights of the control chamber. He had led conquests of over 24 planets, each one an effortless campaign against civilizations that fell before the Dominion's might. He had no reason to believe Earth would be any different. His six-fingered hand rested on the curved railing as he studied the blue-green world below, his lipless mouth curling into something akin to amusement. "Pathetic," he muttered, his voice a guttural growl. His second-in-command, a lean and sharp-featured officer named Kethrel, turned his head toward him. "Their defenses are primitive at best, Commander," Kethrel confirmed, his tone laced with certainty. "No orbital fleet, no planetary shields. Their military relies on chemical projectiles and crude energy sources. We expect minimal resistance." Vorik exhaled through his nostrils, his breath clouding the glass-like observation window for a moment before dissipating. He had studied the human species through Dominion intelligence reports, reckless, short-lived, prone to internal conflict. Yet, for all their flaws, they had spread across their planet like a virus, building great cities, waging endless wars against themselves, and even reaching the threshold of interstellar expansion. That was why the Dominion had decided to act now, before humans became an actual threat. He turned away from the viewport, stepping toward the command platform where dozens of Dominion officers monitored the fleet's operational systems. A translucent holographic display projected Earth's surface in meticulous detail. Cities flickered as pulsing red markers, indicating major population centers. Military installations were highlighted in a dim amber hue, showing their insignificance. A single gesture of his fingers activated the fleet-wide communication channel. "All ships, prepare for planetary assault. Deploy orbital bombardment teams to cripple their infrastructure. Cut their communication networks. Send ground forces to secure key locations. The planet will be under Dominion control within a single rotation." The order was met with immediate precision. The Great Fleet moved as one, its warships descending into low orbit. Silhouettes of carriers deployed their payloads, sleek drop pods that burned through the atmosphere like falling stars, each carrying Dominion shock troopers in their armored exosuits. The first wave was designed to cripple humanity's ability to fight back. Strategic missile silos, radar installations, and military headquarters were struck with surgical efficiency. Explosions bloomed across continents, painting the night sky with fire. On the ground, confusion and terror erupted in equal measure. In Washington, D.C., the president was rushed into an underground bunker as news reports flooded every screen, showing massive alien vessels darkening the skies. In Beijing, emergency sirens howled across the city as automated defense systems futilely fired missiles at invulnerable targets. Across Europe, soldiers scrambled to their posts, but without clear orders, many simply stared at the incomprehensible sight above them. In a hidden military base deep within the Rocky Mountains, General Ethan Caldwell watched the invasion unfold through satellite feeds. His jaw was set in grim determination, his fingers gripping the steel edge of the operations table. The Dominion strategy was clear: overwhelm, intimidate, and subdue. It was the same method used against countless other species. But Caldwell knew one thing about humanity that these aliens had not yet learned. Surrender was not an option. He turned to his officers, his voice steady despite the chaos. "They think this will be easy," he said. "Let's show them just how wrong they are." Across the world, humanity prepared to fight back. The Dominion had come expecting a weak and divided species. What they had failed to consider was that Earth had never needed a common enemy before. Now they had one. And for the first time in history, every nation, every soldier, and every civilian had the same goal: survival. And that was when the real battle began. The first hours of the invasion unfolded as the Dominion had predicted. Major cities burned, military installations lay in ruins, and human governments struggled to maintain order. Dominion forces moved swiftly, their troops spreading across continents with mechanical efficiency. Urban centers fell under their control, their presence an unchallenged force of domination. High Commander Vorik observed the conquest from orbit, confident that humanity's resistance would crumble just as easily as countless other civilizations before them. But then, the first unexpected reports came in. A Dominion officer stood rigid before Vorik on the command deck of Kavarn's Wrath, his posture tense. His scaled fingers hovered over his control panel as he forced himself to deliver the news. "Commander, we are experiencing irregular resistance." Vorik barely shifted his gaze from the main display. "Clarify." The officer hesitated. "The humans are adapting." Vorik turned his head sharply. Impossible. He strode to the central projection, where updated battlefield reports flickered in chaotic movement. He expected to see collapsing defenses, captured cities, and strategic surrender. Instead, certain areas glowed with active combat zones that should have been long subdued. The first anomaly came from the Eurasian front. The Dominion had decimated military installations, yet human forces had regrouped, appearing in unexpected locations, striking with relentless precision. In the ruins of what was once a sprawling metropolis, small bands of human fighters launched coordinated ambushes, targeting Dominion supply convoys. Their weapons, primitive by Dominion standards, should have been ineffective. Yet, against all calculations, their attacks struck key weak points: exosuit joints, exposed sensor arrays, fuel lines. Dominion forces designed for large-scale planetary control found themselves bogged down in a war of attrition. On the Western Front, entire battalions of Dominion infantry units vanished without explanation. Drone surveillance dispatched to investigate returned with fragmented footage, armored human soldiers emerging from tunnels, sewers, and collapsed structures, striking from the shadows before disappearing like ghosts. Dominion commanders struggled to adapt to these unconventional tactics. No matter how many Dominion patrols combed through captured zones, the enemy always seemed to be one step ahead. Vorik's gaze darkened as another transmission crackled through the command bridge. A frantic officer, stationed at what was supposed to be a secured Dominion outpost, shouted over the feed. "The humans are using their own cities against us. They are controlling our supply lines. Their forces are using terrain in ways we cannot predict." The transmission cut out with a burst of static. Vorik's jaw tightened. This was not how the invasion was supposed to progress. Humanity should have surrendered by now. Instead, they had turned Earth into a battlefield unlike any the Dominion had ever faced. In the deep forests of the North American sector, General Ethan Caldwell crouched behind a fallen tree, his rifle braced against his shoulder. His breath was steady, his heartbeat controlled. The Dominion patrol ahead of him moved in perfect formation, their armored bodies sleek and imposing. Their arrogance was their greatest weakness. They saw Earth as just another conquest, another planet to be crushed under their might. They didn't understand what it meant to fight for survival. Caldwell gave the signal. A moment later, gunfire erupted from the treetops, from beneath the earth, from the shadows. Dominion soldiers collapsed before they could react, taken down with calculated precision. Caldwell rose from cover, firing 3 shots in rapid succession. The remaining invaders attempted to regroup, but explosions tore through their ranks as preset charges detonated in a synchronized chain reaction. In less than 30 seconds, the battlefield was silent. He signaled to his team, "We move, now." They vanished into the forest, leaving no trace behind. Across the globe, similar battles unfolded. Humanity was not just resisting, it was adapting. With every encounter, human fighters learned, adjusted, and retaliated with brutal efficiency. The Dominion's once flawless strategies began to unravel. And in orbit, watching his campaign slip further from his grasp, High Commander Vorik clenched his fists. The humans were not breaking, they were learning how to win. High Commander Vorik paced along the length of the command deck aboard Kavarn's Wrath, his armored boots clanking against the reinforced floor. The air in the chamber had grown tense, filled with the silent weight of a campaign unraveling before his eyes. Every Dominion invasion before this one had followed a perfect sequence: overwhelming force, swift submission, absolute control. Yet Earth refused to fall. He turned toward Cathrell, whose posture betrayed unease. The officer's hands twitched over his console, hesitant to deliver the latest reports. "Speak," Vorik commanded, his voice like grinding metal. Cathrell swallowed hard before answering. Human forces have launched synchronized counterstrikes across multiple sectors. Our command posts in the North American and European territories have been compromised. Ground forces are being eliminated faster than we can reinforce them. Vorik narrowed his eyes. He had underestimated humanity's ability to resist, but this was beyond resistance. It was calculated, it was strategic, and it was spreading. He turned to the central display, watching the movements of human forces. They were no longer just launching ambushes or retreating into hiding. They were advancing. In the heart of what had once been Dominion-controlled territory, General Ethan Caldwell moved through the ruins of an abandoned enemy outpost, stepping over the remains of shattered alien armor. The stench of charred metal lingered in the air, mingling with the acrid smoke rising from Dominion vehicles that now lay in smoldering wreckage. His team had struck hard, using stolen enemy weapons against their invaders. Each success brought them closer to reclaiming lost ground. A voice crackled through his radio. "Sir, we intercepted another supply convoy. The aliens abandoned the transport before we even got there." As Caldwell exhaled, his lips curling into a grim smirk. The Dominion was faltering. Their soldiers, once seen as an unstoppable force, now hesitated. They had never faced an enemy that refused to fight by the expected rules of war. His radio buzzed again. "We've confirmed reports. Their orbital command is repositioning. They're on the defensive." Caldwell's grip on his weapon tightened. That was the moment he had been waiting for. He turned to his men. "We push forward. We take the fight to them." Across the world, similar counterattacks surged. Humanity had spent weeks studying Dominion weaknesses, salvaging enemy technology, and striking where it hurt the most. Dominion supply chains were severed, command networks disrupted, and entire battalions wiped out before reinforcements could arrive. The most devastating blow came in the Pacific. The Dominion had established a heavily fortified command hub along the coastline, using it as a staging ground for planetary operations. It had been untouchable, until now. Captain Sofia Ramirez watched through the scope of her rifle, positioned on a high ridge overlooking the enemy base. The night concealed her team's movements, but her breath remained steady. This was not just another strike. This was a message. She gave the order. A second later, the first explosion rocked the Dominion stronghold. The initial blast tore through the main communication relay, silencing their command link. Before the invaders could react, secondary charges detonated, engulfing their primary fuel reserves in a towering inferno. Panicked Dominion forces scrambled, their usual discipline shattered. Ramirez's team struck with ruthless precision, cutting down confused enemy soldiers who had never experienced fear. Until now. The stronghold fell within hours. In orbit, Vorik stared at the battle projections in stunned silence. Earth was no longer the one under siege. His forces were. He clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms. The humans were not just surviving, they were winning. High Commander Vorik stood in the war chamber aboard Kavarn's Wrath, his piercing gaze locked onto the Galactic command feed. The once steady pulse of Dominion fleet signals flickered with unsettling irregularity. Reports from his officers had become increasingly grim. Supply chains severed, ground forces obliterated, strategic positions lost. The humans had turned what should have been a swift conquest into a spiraling disaster. He exhaled sharply, his clawed fingers tightening behind his back. This was no longer a mere resistance, it was a war. A war the Dominion had never expected. He turned as Cathral, his second-in-command, approached, his rigid posture betraying his unease. "The reinforcements?" Vorik asked, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Cathral hesitated before answering. "They should have arrived by now, Commander." Vorik's gaze darkened. The reinforcements were supposed to be the turning point. A full fleet, 30 capital ships strong, armed with enough firepower to raise entire continents. Their arrival was meant to crush the human resurgence and re-establish Dominion control. But the fleet was missing. He moved toward the central console, activating a direct link to the Dominion's high command. A static-filled transmission flickered into view, the image of Supreme Warlord Zarek materializing before him. The Warlord's scaled features were contorted with something Vorik had never seen on his superior's face. Uncertainty. "Vorik," Zarek said, his voice strained, "we have lost contact with your reinforcements." Vorik's stomach twisted. "That is impossible." Zarek's expression hardened. "Nothing is impossible." The last transmission from Fleet Vanguard reported an anomaly upon entering Earth's system. Then, nothing. No distress signal, no debris. They have vanished. Vorik forced himself to remain composed. "An anomaly? Explain." Zarek gestured to the data scrolling across his screen. "A distortion in space-time. Our scientists suspect it to be an electromagnetic disruption field of planetary scale. Whatever the humans have done, it has rendered our reinforcements blind, deaf, and stranded." Vorik's mind raced. If the fleet had been caught in a trap, if Earth's forces had devised a way to neutralize Dominion hyperspace travel, then the realization struck him like a physical blow. "They are picking them off," he muttered. Cathral stiffened. "Commander?" Vorik turned sharply. The humans knew reinforcements were coming. They didn't stop the fleet. They isolated it. Now they are hunting them down, one by one. Cathral's throat tightened. "A galactic fleet does not simply disappear." Vorik's expression darkened. "No, it does not." He turned back to the command console, opening a direct channel to all remaining Dominion forces on Earth. The invasion was unraveling, and there was only one path left. Survival. "Recall all ground units," he ordered. "Pull back to the remaining strongholds. Prepare for orbital retreat." Cathral's eyes widened. "We're abandoning the campaign?" Vorik's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "We have no choice." On the surface, General Ethan Caldwell stood atop the remains of a Dominion walker. Its massive frame collapsed in a heap of smoldering metal. The sky above had shifted, the once dominant sight of Dominion warships replaced with distant flashes, battles waged in orbit, where humanity had seized control of the battlefield. A soldier ran up to him, breathless. "Sir, we intercepted enemy transmissions. They're pulling back." Caldwell's lips curled into a knowing smirk. The invaders were running. He lifted his radio. "All units, push forward. We end this now." In orbit, Vorik watched in silence as human forces surged across the planet below, crushing what remained of his ground troops. He had underestimated Earth. He had underestimated its people. Now all he could do was retreat and hope that the Dominion still had a future after this failure. Because if the humans had already found a way to neutralize a fleet, then there was no telling what they would do next. High Commander Vorik sat in silence within his private chamber aboard Kavarn's Wrath. The once mighty Dominion fleet was in full retreat, its warships battered, its forces decimated. His hand tightened into a fist against the polished surface of the command table, his claws leaving deep grooves in the metal. Never in the Dominion's history had an invasion ended in such humiliation. Never had an enemy been able to turn the tide against an armada that had subjugated entire worlds without challenge. But humanity had done it. Cathral entered, his posture stiff with unease. The officer hesitated before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. Commander, the final evacuation is underway. We are leaving the system. Vorik inhaled slowly, forcing his rage into controlled submission. His mind replayed every mistake, every moment of miscalculation. He had underestimated the humans. He had allowed himself to believe that their lack of interstellar power made them weak. And now the Dominion was retreating, not just from Earth, but from a war it had never imagined losing. He turned his gaze toward the viewport. The blue and green planet hung in the darkness of space, untouched by Dominion rule. Instead of becoming another conquered world, it had become something far worse, a beacon of defiance, a symbol that even the mightiest empire could bleed. The ship trembled as its engines roared to life, joining the remnants of the Dominion fleet as it fled toward the edges of the Sol system. Vorik had no choice but to face what came next. The Galactic Council convened in the Grand Hall of Varric Prime, the beating heart of interstellar governance. Representatives of hundreds of species had gathered in tense silence, their voices low with anxious murmurs. News of Earth's resistance had already spread across the known galaxy, but what had come next had stunned them into fearful disbelief. High Warlord Zarek stood at the central podium, his massive form hunched forward, his claws gripping the railing in frustration. His gaze swept across the assembled leaders, his voice a guttural growl when he finally spoke. "The Dominion fleet is in retreat," he declared. "The humans have pushed us from their world." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Some in the audience whispered in hushed disbelief, others exchanged uneasy glances. For centuries, the Dominion had been an unshakable force, an empire that crushed all who dared resist. But now, it had failed. Zarek's gaze darkened. "And it is worse than mere retreat. The humans have neutralized our hyperspace travel within their system. The reinforcements we sent to crush their resistance, they never reached the battle. They were trapped." A council member, an elder of the Viren race, leaned forward, his insectoid mandibles clicking in unease. "You are saying that the humans possess the ability to control galactic travel?" Zarek's jaw tightened. "I am saying that they have already used it, and that the fleet we sent never returned." A heavy silence filled the chamber. The implications were terrifying. If a single species, one that had not even reached interstellar expansion, had developed a method of trapping and systematically destroying Dominion warships, then the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted. Then the chamber lights dimmed. A transmission signal flared to life, and a towering holographic projection materialized above the gathered council members. It was a human. He stood tall, clad in a simple yet imposing military uniform, his expression calm but cold. His presence alone sent a ripple of unease through the room. Humanity had never before spoken to the Galactic Council, until now. His voice, deep and unwavering, echoed through the chamber. "My name is General Ethan Caldwell of the United Earth Defense Force." His gaze swept across the council members, his tone measured and deliberate. "I know you have all heard what has happened. You know that the Dominion came to our world expecting submission. Instead, we buried them." Murmurs spread through the council, but Caldwell continued, his tone turning sharper. "This is your only warning. Earth is not a hunting ground. We are not a resource for empires to plunder. If any species, any government, anyone attempts to take what is ours, you will suffer the same fate as the Dominion." The council chambers erupted in chaos. Some representatives shouted in protest, others recoiled in stunned silence. But Caldwell did not flinch. He let the weight of his words settle before delivering his final message. "We did not seek war, but when war came to us, we finished it." He leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Consider this our introduction to your galaxy." The transmission cut. The chamber remained in stunned silence, the weight of the message suffocating. The Dominion, once thought invincible, had been humbled. Humanity had revealed itself, not as prey, but as something far more dangerous. High Warlord Zarek exhaled slowly, his claws gripping the railing. He knew what the rest of the Council now understood. The age of unchecked Dominion conquest was over, and the age of humanity had begun.